On a Tuesday evening in Brooklyn, three young men surrounded a woman on the sidewalk and told her she was not going anywhere. She froze. 20 people walked past. Not one of them stopped. But at the far end of the block, a man in a faded gray hoodie set down a plastic bag full of light bulbs, and his hands went still at his sides. He had not spoken to a stranger in weeks. He had not fought anyone in years. He had lost the two people he loved most in this world and had spent the last decade trying to disappear. But something in that woman's silence, the way her body locked and her voice died in her throat, pulled him forward like a hand on his chest. Seconds later, the entire street went quiet. His name was Keanu Reeves, and almost nobody on that block knew it. He was 60 years old. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, streaked so heavily with silver that in certain light it looked almost white at the temples. He had not shaved in 3 days, and the stubble along his jaw gave his lean face a weathered, roughened look that made him seem older than he was, or perhaps exactly as old as he felt. He wore a faded, gray hoodie with a small tear near the left pocket that he had never bothered to mend. Dark jeans, washed so many times they had turned the color of storm clouds, and black boots, so worn at the heels that his footsteps made almost no sound on the concrete. He carried a plastic bag from the hardware store on Atlantic Avenue. Inside were two 60-watt light bulbs and a set of brass cabinet hinges. Small things, ordinary things. The kind of errands that filled his evenings now and gave him reasons to leave his apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk. Up in a neighborhood where nobody recognized him, and he preferred it that way. Once, he had been one of the most famous men on earth. Action films that earned hundreds of millions. Red carpets, magazine covers. A face that people stopped on the street to photograph. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. Someone younger, someone who still believed the world could be held together by willpower and good intentions. Someone who had not yet learned what loss actually meant. He had learned. Her name was Jennifer. They were not married, but she was the person he would have married if the world had been kinder. She was pregnant with their daughter. When the baby came too early, born still, a silence in the delivery room that no amount of fame or money could fill. They named her Ava. They buried her in a cemetery in Los Angeles on a Thursday afternoon while the sun shone with an indifference that made knew want to scream at the sky. Jennifer never recovered. Not really. The grief settled into her like weather, changing her climate permanently. 18 months after Ava, Jennifer died in a car accident. Single vehicle. The police report listed it as accidental. Keanu listed it as the end of everything he understood about himself. He did not fall apart the way people expected. He did not check into a facility or disappear into substances or make headlines for the wrong reasons. He simply contracted. He pulled his life smaller and smaller until it fit into a space so tight that nothing else could get in, and nothing inside could leak out. He sold the house in the hills. He gave away most of what he owned. He stopped accepting film roles, stopped returning calls from his agent, stopped going to the places where people knew his face and wanted something from it. He moved to Brooklyn, a 3rd-floor walk, up in a neighborhood of bodegas and laundromats and people who minded their own business. He told the landlord his name was John. He paid rent in cash. He kept his hair long and his beard unkempt and wore clothes that made him invisible, which was exactly what he wanted to be. He had been invisible for almost 10 years now, and in that time, he had discovered something that surprised him. Invisibility was not painful the way he had expected. It was restful. For a man who had spent decades being watched, being photographed, being analyzed and discussed and projected upon by millions of strangers who thought they knew him because they had seen his face on a screen, the simple act of walking down a street without anyone glancing twice was a form of freedom he had never known he needed. He ate breakfast at a diner on Flatbush Avenue where the waitress called him on and refilled his coffee without asking. He bought groceries at the corner bodega where the owner, a Dominican man named Victor, knew him only as the quiet guy from the third floor who always bought the same things: black coffee, bread, eggs, apples. Simple food for a simple life. Sometimes, late at night, he would walk along the waterfront and look across the river at the Manhattan skyline. All those lights, all those lives, all that ambition and noise and hunger. He had been part of it once. He had stood on rooftops in that city and felt like the world was something he could hold in his hands. Now he stood on the Brooklyn side and felt something different. Not regret, not longing, just a quiet acceptance that the man who had lived that life and the man who stood here now were connected by memory, but separated by everything else. The martial arts training had continued, though. Not for films, not for fitness, for something he could not quite name. During the worst months after Jennifer died, when the grief hit like a physical weight on his chest, at 3 in the morning, and he could not breathe, he had gone to a small dojo in Red Hook run by an old Korean instructor named Park who never asked personal questions and never watched television and had no idea who Knew was. 3 times a week, sometimes 4, Keanu trained. Jiu-jitsu, judo, practical self-defense. The kind of training that did not teach you how to look impressive, but how to move efficiently, how to use someone's weight against them, how to end a confrontation in seconds rather than minutes. It was a form of meditation for him, a way to be entirely present in his body when his mind wanted to be anywhere else, a way to exhaust himself so thoroughly that sleep came without the dreams. He had not used any of it outside the dojo in all those years. He hoped he never would. The light bulbs and hinges were for Lily Caldwell. She was 12 years old. She lived in the apartment directly below his with her grandmother, Margaret, a 75-year-old woman with silver hair and kind, tired eyes who had taken custody of Lily after her mother, Margaret's daughter, died of an overdose 4 years ago. Lily's father had never been in the picture. Margaret did not talk about him. Lily did not ask. Knew had met Lily by accident. A water leak in his bathroom had dripped through to their ceiling, and he had gone down to apologize and offer to pay for the damage. Margaret had opened the door, and behind her, sitting at a small kitchen table covered with library books, was a girl with dark blonde hair and serious blue eyes who looked up at him and said, without any preamble, "Oh, are you the one making all the noise up there?" He had not made any noise. He was possibly the quietest tenant in the building. But something about her directness, the way she spoke to him like he was a person and not a ghost, cracked open a door he had thought was permanently sealed. Over the months that followed, he became part of their life in small, careful ways. He fixed the cabinet door in their kitchen that would not close properly. He walked Lily home from school on days when Margaret's arthritis was too bad for her to make the trip. He sat with her at the kitchen table and helped with math homework, discovering that he was terrible at fractions, but patient enough to figure them out together. He installed a better lock on their front door after a break in 3 buildings down. He never told them who he was. Margaret called him John. Lily called him Mr. John, with a formality that made him want to smile and weep at the same time. He was not her father. He was not trying to replace anyone. He was simply a man in his 60s who had lost a daughter he never got to hold, and a girl who had lost every parent she had ever known, and the two of them had found a way to be useful to each other. Tonight, he was bringing light bulbs because the overhead fixture in Lily's room had burned out 3 days ago, and she was doing homework by the light of a desk lamp that was not bright enough and gave her headaches. The hinges were for the bathroom cabinet that Margaret could not open without the door catching and scraping her knuckles. Small things. But knew had learned, slowly and painfully, that small things were the only things that actually mattered. He was 4 blocks from home when he heard the laugh. It came from ahead and to his right, sharp and theatrical. the kind of laugh designed to dominate a space. Kaya, Nu slowed without thinking, the way you slow when a sound does not fit the rhythm of the street around you. Brooklyn at dusk had its own music. Car horns and music from open windows and the metallic rattle of shop gates being pulled down. This laugh did not belong to that music. It had a different frequency. It carried an edge. He stopped near a metal newsstand and looked. 3 young men had formed a loose semicircle on the sidewalk, blocking the path of a woman who had been walking toward them. She had stopped. She was trying to step around them. They were not letting her. The one in front was tall and lean, maybe 22, with a sharp jawline and clothes, cropped sandy brown hair. He wore a black hoodie with the hood pushed back and dark jeans, and he stood with the kind of loose, timid confidence that came from being young and strong, and accustomed to people getting out of his way. His name was Brandon Mercer, though Nu did not know that yet. To Brandon's left stood a shorter, thicker young man with a faded red tee, shirt stretched over a barrel chest and arms that had seen the inside of a weight room. His name was Cody Walsh. He was 21 and had the face of someone who smiled when he was uncomfortable, which was often. He smiled now, a nervous, performative grin that showed too many teeth. On the right was the youngest, thin and wiry with restless energy that showed in how he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, hands jammed in the pockets of an oversized green army jacket. His name was Travis Dunn. He was 20 and looked younger. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the street, the crowd, the sky, the way animals scan for threats. The woman wore a gray blazer over a white blouse and dark pants. She carried a brown leather bag over one shoulder. She was 32 years old, and her name was Caroline Bennett. She worked as a junior attorney at a firm on Court Street and had stayed late preparing a deposition summary. She had made this walk home hundreds of times. Tonight, 3 strangers had decided she was their entertainment. Brandon's voice carried that forced casual tone that barely concealed the threat underneath. The words themselves were almost irrelevant. It was the tone that did the work, the implication that she was trapped, that her discomfort was funny, that she existed for their amusement. Caroline tried to step left. Travis moved to block her. She tried to step right. Cody shifted his weight. It was coordinated enough to show this was not the first time they had done something like this, or at least something adjacent to it. The casual cruelty of young men who had discovered that intimidation produced a feeling they could not get anywhere else. Caroline's shoulders drew inward. Her chin dropped. Her hands tightened on the strap of her bag until her knuckles went pale. She was not just scared. She was somewhere else entirely. Nu could see it even from 50 feet away, the way her eyes went slightly unfocused, the way her breathing changed from quick and shallow to something slower and more disconnected. He recognized that look. He had seen it in the mirror enough times to know what it meant. She was freezing, not the cold kind. The kind that happens when the body remembers something the mind is trying to forget. Caroline Bennett had spent 2 years in a relationship with a man who controlled every aspect of her life. Who told her what to wear, who she could speak to, when she was allowed to leave the apartment, who grabbed her wrists hard enough to leave fingerprints and then apologized with flowers and the promise that it would never happen again. She had escaped that relationship 3 years ago. She had rebuilt her life, passed the bar exam, gotten a job, found an apartment of her own. But the body keeps its own records. And right now, surrounded by 3 men who were closing the space around her, her body had pulled up an old file and was playing it on repeat. She could not move. She could not speak. She could barely breathe. 20 people walked past in the 30 seconds Nu stood watching. Some glanced over. Most did not. This was a city. People had learned to calibrate their awareness, to see enough to assess personal risk, and then look away if the risk was not theirs. A woman being bothered by 3 young men on a lit street was uncomfortable to witness, but easy to categorize as someone else's problem. K? Ah? New understood this. He had spent years perfecting the art of not getting involved, of making himself small enough to pass through the world without friction. He had a girl waiting for him 3 floors up who needed light bulbs. He had a grandmother who needed cabinet hinges. He had a quiet evening ahead. But he also knew what silence sounded like from the inside. He knew what it felt like to stand in a room full of people and realize that not one of them was going to step forward. He knew because he had spent months after Jennifer's death surrounded by people who cared about him, but could not bring themselves to say the hard things, to sit in the grief with him, to do anything other than offer condolences that evaporated like missed the moment they were spoken. Silence had a weight. It pressed down. It told you that what was happening to you did not matter enough for anyone to act. He set the plastic bag down on the sidewalk beside the newsstand. The light bulbs clinked softly against each other inside. Someone would probably take it. That was fine. He could buy more. He started walking toward them. His stride was steady, not rushed. He did not clench his fists or set his jaw or do any of the things that people do when they are preparing for confrontation. He simply walked the way a man walks when he has made a decision and is now following through. His worn boots made almost no sound on the concrete. His face was calm, neutral, the face of someone who had already run through the possibilities in his mind and accepted all of them. Brandon noticed him first. The young man's head turned, tracking the approach of this stranger with the instinctive alertness of someone accustomed to reading threat levels. For a moment, his grin stayed in place. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. There was something about the way this older man moved, something purposeful, that did not match his appearance. He looked like a nobody. He moved like he was not. Cody noticed Brandon's attention shift and followed his gaze. Travis caught it a half-second later, his restless energy suddenly channeling into something sharper. Caroline did not notice at all. She was still frozen, still locked inside the memory her body was replaying, her eyes staring at a point somewhere. Beyond the 3 men in front of her, seeing a different room, a different face, a different pair of hands. New closed the distance to 10 feet and stopped. He positioned himself slightly between Caroline and the 3 young men, not directly in front of her but offset enough to create a barrier without boxing her in. His hands hung loose at his sides. He spoke. His voice was quiet, level, and carried the absolute clarity of a man who meant exactly what he said and nothing more. Let her go. The simplicity of it caught Brandon off guard. There was no aggression in the tone, no posturing, no challenge hidden beneath the words. It was a plain statement, delivered with the same energy someone might use to read a street sign aloud. Let her go, as if the outcome were already decided and he was simply informing them of it. Brandon recovered. The grin came back, harder now, layered with defensive aggression that came from being challenged in front of his crew. This isn't your business, old man. New did not react. He had been called worse things by better people. His eyes moved briefly to Caroline, assessing her state, then back to Brandon. It is now? Cody stepped forward, chest inflating the way young men's chests did when they were more scared than they wanted to admit. You think you're some kind of hero? There's 3 of us. Anu's expression did not change. I can count. Travis laughed, a high, nervous sound that cracked in the middle. Man's got jokes. You want to get hurt for someone you don't even know. Something shifted in Nu's face. Not anger. Something colder and more focused. A small tightening around the eyes that suggested he was running calculations, measuring distances, cataloging the way each of them stood, which foot bore their weight, where their hands were, how quickly they could close the gap. He had done these calculations 1,000 times on the mats at the dojo in Red Hook. The difference was that here, the floor was concrete and nobody was wearing pads. His voice remained quiet, Walk away. All three of you. Right now. Brandon took a step closer. His need to maintain dominance was overriding whatever instinct was telling him this was not going the way he had planned. He raised his voice, playing to the small crowd of onlookers that was beginning to form along the edges of the sidewalk. Or what? You're going to fight all three of us? Key? Anu did not answer immediately. He shifted his weight. It was a subtle movement, barely perceptible. A slight redistribution from one foot to the other, but it changed everything. It was the way someone moved who knew exactly where their center of gravity was and could redirect force from any direction. It was the kind of movement that only another trained fighter would fully recognize, but that registered on a deeper, more instinctive level for everyone else. Brandon felt it. His confidence flickered, like a bulb with a loose connection. The moment stretched. People had stopped on both sides of the street now. Phones were out, raised to eye level, recording. Nobody called anyone. Nobody intervened. They just watched, the way people watched car accidents and house fires, with horror that was indistinguishable from fascination. Caroline had not moved. She stood like a statue carved from fear, her eyes still unfocused, her breathing barely visible. Whatever was happening around her had become noise that could not penetrate the older, louder memory playing inside her head. Key. Nu spoke one more time. His voice carried a weight that made Brandon take a half step backward despite himself. Last chance. Brandon's face flushed dark red. He had been challenged in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, in front of his crew. His pride had backed him into a corner where the only way out that his ego would accept was forward. Through this stranger, through whatever happened next, he turned to Cody and Travis with a look that said follow me and made his choice. His right fist came up fast. It was a crude, telegraphed punch aimed at Key. Nu's jaw thrown with real intent, but no real technique. The punch of a young man who had won fights before through size and aggression and had never encountered someone who knew how to move. Anu moved. It was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. There was no spinning or jumping or anything that looked like the choreography of the films he had once made. He simply shifted his weight to his left, pivoting his torso offline so that Brandon's fist passed through empty air, where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. His right hand came up and caught Brandon's extended wrist, controlling it. His left palm struck Brandon's chest, not his face, his chest, with a sharp, precise force that drove the air from the younger man's lungs and sent him stumbling backward. 2 seconds. Cody reacted on instinct, charging from Key. Nu's left with his arms spread wide, trying to tackle him with the brute force that his stocky build suggested was his only strategy. Nu pivoted, using his grip on Brandon's wrist to swing the taller man directly into Cody's path. The two of them collided hard, Brandon's shoulder catching Cody full in the face. Both went down in a graceless tangle of limbs and cursing. 4 seconds. Travis stood frozen for 1 beat, then 2, watching his friends hit the pavement with an expression of total disbelief. Then fear translated into the only language he knew, and he rushed forward with wild, looping swings that had no target and no plan. Nu stepped inside the first swing, got his left arm around Travis's extended right, and used the younger man's own momentum to take him off balance. A quick trip of the ankle, and Travis went down hard on the concrete, the impact knocking the wind from his chest. 7 seconds. From Brandon's first punch to all 3 men on the ground. 7 seconds. The street went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that falls when the world holds its breath, when everyone in earshot recognizes that they have just witnessed something they do not fully understand. Cars still moved in the street. Music still played from a window somewhere above. But the human sounds, the talking, the laughing, the shuffle of feet on sidewalk, all of it stopped. Brandon lay on his side, gasping, trying to get air back into his lungs. Cody sat up slowly, one hand pressed to his nose where Brandon's shoulder had hit it, checking for blood and finding it. Travis remained flat on his back, staring at the darkening sky, his chest heaving in ragged gulps. Keanu stood in the center of them. His breathing was slightly elevated, barely noticeable. His hands were already back at his sides, loose and open. He had not punched anyone. He had not kicked anyone while they were down. He had done nothing more than redirect what they had thrown at him, turning their aggression into the instrument of their own defeat. He looked down at them. His voice was steady. "Get up. Leave." Cody found his voice first, though it came out wet and frightened through the blood running from his nose. "Man, we didn't mean anything. We were just messing around." Keanu's expression hardened. "You were hurting someone. That is not messing around." Travis sat up slowly, looking at Keanu the way you look at a locked door that you just realized you cannot force open. We're going. Brandon got his breath back enough to speak. His voice was stripped bare, all the performance gone, all the swagger and false confidence dissolved. He was just a young man on a dirty sidewalk, hurting and humiliated. And underneath all of it, frightened. "Who are you?" he said. Keanu did not answer that. He stepped back, giving them room to stand, but kept himself positioned between them and Caroline. Brandon pushed himself to his feet. His hands were shaking. He would not look at Keanu directly. Cody stood next, pinching his nose, blood on his shirt. Travis came last, slower, limping slightly from where his hip had hit the concrete. "Say it to her." Brandon's head came up. "What?" Keanu gestured toward Caroline with his chin. She had not moved. She was still frozen in the same position, though her eyes had begun to refocus, as if the violence had jolted her back to the present. "Apologize to her. All of you." Cody went first, eager to be done, to be gone. He turned toward Caroline and spoke through his bloody nose, the words thick and nasal. "I'm sorry. We shouldn't have done that." Travis followed immediately. "Yeah, sorry. Really? I'm sorry." Brandon was last. It cost him something visible to turn and face the woman he had been tormenting 5 minutes ago. He looked at her for what might have been the first time. Actually, looked at her and saw the fear still written on her face, the way her body was clenched, the tears she was fighting to hold back. Something behind his eyes shifted. His jaw worked. When he spoke, the words came out raw and unsteady. "I'm sorry. That was wrong. I don't know why I did that. I'm really sorry." Caroline stared at him. She did not respond. She was still reassembling herself, still sorting the present from the past, still trying to determine which fear belonged to which memory. "Now go," Keanu said. They went. Brandon first, his shoulders hunched forward like a man walking into a wind that nobody else could feel. Cody and Travis close behind, their earlier confidence utterly erased. They turned a corner and were gone. The silence on the street lasted another 5 seconds. Then someone in the gathered crowd let out a breath, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. People showed each other their phone screens, replaying what they had just recorded from slightly different angles. A man in a business suit said something about calling the police. A teenage girl said she had gotten the whole thing on video. Several people moved toward Keanu, trying to talk to him, to congratulate him, to ask his name. He ignored all of it. He walked to Caroline, slowly, making sure she could see him coming, making sure his approach did not add to the fear already overloading her system. He stopped 3 feet away and spoke with a gentleness that was the exact opposite of everything that had just happened. "You are safe now. They are gone." Caroline's face crumpled, not into tears, though those were close, into something more fundamental, a release, the held breath after a near drowning, the moment when the body finally believes the danger has passed and lets go of the tension it has been holding. She nodded. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Thank you." I could not move. I wanted to scream, to run, but I could not make my body do anything. It just shut down. Keanu understood this completely. That is not weakness. That is what happens when the body is protecting itself from something it remembers. Caroline looked at him sharply, and he saw the recognition in her eyes. Not of his face, of his understanding. The understanding of someone who had been frozen by his own memories enough times to know exactly what it felt like. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Because it happened to me, too." He did not elaborate. Some things were too large to explain on a sidewalk to a stranger, even a stranger you had just fought for. He looked at her carefully, assessing whether she was steady enough to walk. "Where do you live?" "How far?" "5 blocks. I have walked it 1,000 times." He heard what she did not say. She had felt safe on this rope before. She would never feel entirely safe on it again. That was another kind of damage. Invisible, but permanent. "I will walk with you. At least until you are close." She looked like she might decline, might insist she was fine. But then she simply nodded, because the truth was that she was not fine and might not be for a while. They walked together. For the first 2 blocks, neither spoke. Knew carried nothing now. The plastic bag with the light bulbs was gone, left behind on the sidewalk, probably already picked up by someone who needed light bulbs, or by someone who would throw them away. It did not matter. Caroline broke the silence first. "What you did back there, that was not luck. You knew exactly what you were doing. I have had some training. After I lost someone, I needed something physical, something to keep me in my body when my mind wanted to leave it." She glanced at him, hearing the weight compressed into those few words. "I am sorry for your loss." He nodded, accepting it, not explaining. Not the time or place. They walked another block. Caroline spoke again, her voice thoughtful now, the fear beginning to settle into something she could carry rather than something carrying her. "Those guys. They thought they could do whatever they wanted, that nobody would stop them, that no one was watching. Someone was watching. But only you stopped. 20 people must have walked past." New thought about this. About the crowd with their phones. About the man in the suit who mentioned calling the police but did not actually do it. About all the faces that had turned away. "People are afraid," he said, "not of the danger, of the involvement. They are afraid of what it will cost them to care. And you were not afraid of that." He was quiet for several steps. Then he said something that surprised even himself, something he had not articulated before, not even in his own mind. "I have a girl. Not my daughter. A neighbor. She is 12. I help with her homework. I fix things in her apartment. I walk her home from school. She does not know who I used to be and she does not care. She just knows I show up." He paused. "If someone did what those men did to her, someday, on some street, I would need to believe that someone would step in. I would need to believe it the way I need to believe the sun will come up. Because if I cannot believe that, then nothing I do matters. None of the light bulbs or cabinet hinges or math homework means anything if the world just looks away when it counts." Caroline stopped walking. She turned to face him fully, and in the fading light, her eyes were bright. "That is the most honest reason anyone has ever given me for anything." He did not know what to say to that. So he said nothing. They reached her building. She keyed in the entry code and paused at the door. She turned back. "I do not know your name." "John," he said. The lie came automatically. The name he had been using for years. She studied his face for a moment. Something flickered in her expression, not recognition exactly, but something close to it. A question she decided not to ask. "Thank you, John." "Really? Take care of yourself." And Caroline. She looked surprised that he remembered her name. She had said it once during the walk. "Yes. What happened to you before? Whatever it was that made you freeze tonight, that was not your fault. None of it was your fault. And it does not make you weak." Her eyes filled. She blinked it back and nodded once, quick and firm, the nod of a woman who was going to hold herself together until she was behind a closed door. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she was inside, and the door closed, and Anu was alone on the sidewalk. He stood there for a moment. The evening was settling into night. The streetlights had come on, casting circles of orange on the pavement. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere a child laughed. The city continued its rhythm, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its arteries. He should go home. Lily needed light bulbs. Margaret needed hinges. He would have to stop at the hardware store again tomorrow. But he did not go home. Not yet. Something was pulling at him. A thread he could not let go of. He turned and started walking back toward the place where the confrontation had happened. Not back to the exact spot. Past it. Around the corner where Brandon and his friends had disappeared. He did not know what he was looking for. He told himself he was just making sure they had truly left the area, that they were not circling back, that Caroline's walk home tomorrow would not bring her face to face with them again. That was the rational explanation. The real explanation was simpler and harder to admit. He had seen something when Brandon hit the ground. In that moment when the young man's bravado had been stripped away, and his real face was exposed. Anu had noticed a detail that he could not stop thinking about. On the inside of Brandon's left wrist, partially hidden by the cuff of his hoodie sleeve, was a small faded tattoo. 4 digits. The kind of identification number assigned by the juvenile detention system in New York State. Anu knew this because a stunt coordinator he had worked with decades ago, a man named Pete who had grown up in the foster system, had the same kind of mark on the same wrist and had told him about it once during a long day on set. Brandon Mercer was not a monster. He was a product. A product of whatever system had stamped that number on his skin and then released him back into the world without giving him a single tool for surviving it. Anu found him 3 blocks away. Brandon was sitting alone on the metal steps of a fire escape in a narrow alley between 2 brick buildings. The alley smelled like dumpster and rain and something chemical. A single bulb above a service door cast weak yellow light that made everything look jaundiced. Cody and Travis were gone. They had split the moment they were out of sight, disappearing into the city like water into a drain, eager to put distance between themselves and what had happened. Brandon sat with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. He was not crying. He was just sitting with the kind of stillness that comes after humiliation, when the body has nowhere to go and the mind is replaying the worst moments on a loop. He heard footsteps and looked up. When he saw Anu, his face went white. He scrambled to his feet, pressing his back against the fire escape railing, his fists coming up instinctively. I don't want trouble. We left. We're gone. Anu stopped at the mouth of the alley. He raised both hands, palms out, the universal gesture of I am not here to hurt you. He spoke calmly. I did not come to fight. Brandon stared at him, chest heaving, the fear naked on his face. Without his friends, without the group dynamic that had inflated him into someone larger than he was, he looked exactly like what he was. A 22-year-old kid who was terrified and exhausted and had no idea what to do next. Then what do you want? Anu did not answer immediately. He looked at the alley, at the dumpster, at the weak light, at this young man backed against a fire escape in a place that smelled like failure. He thought about what the right thing to do was. He thought about walking away, about going home, about the light bulbs he still needed to buy. Instead, he sat down, right there, on the dirty concrete at the edge of the alley. He lowered himself slowly, the way a man his age sits down when his knees remind him they have been carrying him for 60 years, and he leaned his back against the brick wall and stretched his legs out in front of him. Brandon watched this with complete bewilderment. This man who had just dismantled him and his 2 friends in seconds was now sitting on the ground in an alley looking up at him, with an expression that held no anger, no judgment, no superiority, just patience. What are you doing? Brandon asked. Sitting? Why? Because you look like you need someone to sit with you. Brandon's face contorted, not with anger this time, but with something more complex. Confusion, suspicion, and underneath those, barely visible, the thinnest crack of something that might have been gratitude. He did not sit down. Not yet. He stood there for a long time, arms crossed, jaw working, staring at this stranger who made no sense. A man he had tried to punch was now sitting in the dirt beside a dumpster offering him company. The world had stopped following its rules. Finally, Brandon slid down the fire escape steps until he was sitting on the bottom one, about 5 feet from Keanu. Close enough to talk, far enough to run. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The sounds of the city filled the silence. Distant traffic, a helicopter somewhere, the bass line of music from an apartment above them. Then Keanu said, "Who taught you that was how you get respect?" Brandon's head snapped toward him. His eyes narrowed. What? What you were doing to that woman. The way you stood. The things you said. Someone taught you that. Who was it? Brandon's jaw clenched. Nobody taught me anything? Exactly. The single word hung in the air. Brandon stared at Keanu, and something in his face shifted, like a plate moving beneath the surface of the earth. It was not a collapse. It was the beginning of a tremor. "You don't know anything about me," Brandon said, but his voice had lost its edge. It sounded young now. Younger than 22. "No," Keanu agreed. "But I know what it looks like when someone has been alone for a long time, and the only way they know how to feel powerful is by making someone else feel small." Brandon's breathing changed. It got faster, then slower, then caught in his chest like something physical was stuck there. "My dad left when I was 6, he said. The words came out flat, mechanical, the way people recite facts they have told themselves so many times the feeling has been worn off like paint on a banister. "My mom worked doubles at the hospital. I never saw her. I got into trouble in school. They sent me to juvenile. I was 14. He held up his left wrist, and the tattoo was visible now, the 4 faded digits. "I was in the system for 2 years. When I got out, I had nowhere to go. Mom had moved. No forwarding address. I surfed. I did whatever I had to do. Cody and Travis, they are the closest thing I have had to family in years." New listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer commentary or judgment or the kind of hollow empathy that people offer when they want a conversation to be over. He just listened the way you listen to rain, completely and without agenda. When Brandon was finished, the silence came back, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not hostile, not empty, full. Full of everything that had been said and everything that had not. New spoke. His voice was low, and he did not look at Brandon while he said it. He looked at the brick wall across the alley, at a crack in the mortar that ran from the ground to somewhere above the light. "I lost someone. 2 people. The woman I loved and the daughter we were supposed to have together. The baby came too early and did not survive. And then her mother, my partner, she died too. 18 months later," he paused. The crack in the mortar seemed to widen and narrow with his breathing. "For years, I was angry at everything, not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that turns inward and eats you from the inside until there is nothing left but the shell. I wanted the world to feel as empty as I did. I wanted everyone around me to understand what it was like to lose the things that made life worth living." He turned his head and looked at Brandon directly. "I know what it feels like to want to burn everything down. But I learned something. Slowly. Painfully. The anger does not make you stronger. It just makes you alone. And the lonelier you get, the angrier you get. And the angrier you get, the more people leave, until you are sitting in an alley somewhere wondering how you got here." Brandon's eyes were bright. He was fighting it. Fighting the thing that was rising in his chest like floodwater behind a dam. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cords. "Then what am I supposed to do?" His voice cracked on the last word. Not the voice of a man who terrorized women on sidewalks. The voice of a boy who had never been taught anything except that the world did not want him. K. New reached into the inside pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small, battered card. It was cream-colored, soft at the edges from being carried for years. On it was printed the name of a church in Brooklyn, Grace Community Fellowship. Below that, a name, Pastor James Whitfield. This man, Kia, New said, holding the card between two fingers, is the reason I am still alive. I do not mean that the way people say it when they are being dramatic. I mean it literally. There were nights, after Jennifer died, when I sat in my apartment and thought about whether the world needed me in it. James is the one who sat with me on those nights. He did not preach. He did not quote scripture. He just sat. The way I am sitting with you now. He extended the card toward Brandon. You do not owe me anything. We are not friends. What happened tonight does not make us anything to each other. But if you ever want to talk to someone who will listen without judging, who has seen worse than anything you have done and still believes people can change, call that number. Brandon stared at the card. He did not take it. Why would you do this? I tried to hit you. Less. I was hurting that woman. Less. And you are going to just sit here and give me a church card, like I am some project. New shook his head slowly. You are not a project. You are a person who has been treated like you are not one for so long that you started to believe it. And when people believe they are nothing, they act like it. He set the card on the step beside Brandon. That is not who you have to be. He stood up. His knees protested. His back was stiff from the cold concrete. He brushed the dirt off his jeans and looked at Brandon one more time. The woman you scared tonight, her name is Caroline. She was already hurt before you got to her. She was already carrying wounds you could not see. What you did tonight opened those wounds back up. Brandon's face crumpled. I am not telling you this to make you feel worse. I am telling you because you need to understand that the people you treat like entertainment are real. They have lives that are already hard enough. They do not need you making them harder. He turned and started to walk away. Hey, Brandon said. New stopped but did not turn around. What is your name? A pause. Then, John. John. Yeah, thank you for not just beating us up and leaving. New stood there for a moment, his back to the young man on the fire escape steps, his face hidden. Something moved across his features that no one saw. A grief that was also a gratitude. A loneliness that was also a connection. Take care of yourself, kid, he said, and walked out of the alley and into the night. He bought new light bulbs at a bodega 4 blocks from home. They did not have the right wattage, but they would do. He climbed the 3 flights to his apartment, changed his hoodie because it smelled like alley, and went downstairs to Margaret and Lily's door. Margaret opened it with a smile that made the lines around her eyes deepen into something warm. John, you are late tonight? Hardware store was crowded. The lie came easily. Lily was at the kitchen table, math textbook open, pencil moving. She looked up and her face brightened in a way that hit New in the center of his chest every single time. Mr. John, did you get the light bulbs? I got the light bulbs. He spent the next hour installing them. The new light filled Lily's room with a warm glow that was too yellow, but was 100 times better than the dim desk lamp she had been suffering under. She tested it by reading a paragraph from her history textbook aloud, squinting experimentally, then nodding with the seriousness of a building inspector approving a renovation. Good enough, she declared. New fixed the cabinet hinges while Margaret made tea. They sat in the small kitchen and drank it together, Lily doing homework. Margaret reading a library book. New staring at nothing in particular with a cup warming his hands. This was what he had been protecting on that street. Not just Caroline. The ability for a girl to do her homework under a working light. the ability for an old woman to open a cabinet without scraping her knuckles. The small, ordinary, sacred architecture of a life that was safe enough to be boring. He went upstairs and lay on his bed in the dark. The ceiling was cracked. The radiator ticked. Somewhere outside, a siren rose and fell and faded. He thought about Brandon Mercer sitting on the fire escape steps with a church card in his hand. He thought about whether it would matter. Whether one conversation in an alley could redirect a life that had been veering off course since childhood. He did not know. He could not control that. He could only control what he had done. And what he had done was stop. On a street where everyone else kept walking, he had stopped. That had to be enough for now. But the story was not over, not by a long distance. Because 3 months later, a knock would come on his door that he did not expect, and the young man standing on the other side would be holding something that would break key. News heart in the best possible way. Brandon did not call the number on the card that night, or the next night, or the night after that. He kept the card in his back pocket and felt its edges pressing against him every time he sat down, a constant small irritation that he could have eliminated by throwing it away, but somehow never did. He went back to his routine, or what passed for one. He slept on Cody's couch. He ate whatever was cheapest at the corner store. He looked for work and did not find it, because 22-year-olds with juvenile records and no fixed address and no references did not get callbacks. The days blurred together the way they always did, gray and shapeless, distinguished from each other only by the weather and the varying depths of his hunger. But something had changed. A crack had formed in the wall he had built around himself, and through that crack, light was getting in. The light was uncomfortable. It illuminated things he had spent years learning not to see. The fear on Caroline's face, the calm in the stranger's eyes, the way a 60-year-old man had sat down in the dirt beside a dumpster and treated him like a person instead of a problem. On the 11th day, he called. Pastor James Whitfield answered on the third ring. His voice was warm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had nowhere more important to be than right here, right now, on this phone call. He did not ask Brandon why he was calling. He did not ask what he had done. He simply said, "Tell me about yourself," and then listened for 45 minutes without interrupting. The next morning, Brandon walked through the doors of Grace Community Fellowship for the first time. It was not what he expected. There was no sermon, no pressure. No one handed him a Bible or asked him to pray. A woman named Ruth gave him a plate of scrambled eggs and toast and a cup of coffee that was better than anything he had ever tasted, and she said, "Sit anywhere you like, sweetheart." And that was it. He went back the next day, and the next. On the 4th day, Pastor James introduced him to the Second Step program. It operated out of the church basement, a large open space that had been converted into a workshop. There were workbenches and lathes and racks of hand tools that gleamed under fluorescent lights. The smell was sawdust and varnish and something clean. The instructor was a man named Earl, 73 years old, hands like sandpaper, voice like gravel. He had been a master carpenter for 50 years and had spent the last 10 teaching young men and women who had come out of the system with nothing. He called everyone son, regardless of age or gender, and he had 2 rules. Show up on time. Respect the wood. Brandon showed up on time. He respected the wood. He learned to measure twice and cut once. He learned that a chisel was not a weapon, but a precision instrument that required patience and focus and a steady hand. He learned that the grain of birch ran differently than the grain of oak. That maple was harder than it looked, that every piece of wood had a direction it wanted to go, and your job was to find it and work with it, not against it. He discovered something in that basement that he had never found anywhere else. Stillness. The kind that comes from being completely absorbed in a task that requires your full attention. The kind that leaves no room for anger or emptiness or the gnawing voice that told him he was nothing. For the first time in his life, Brandon Mercer was building something instead of breaking it. The knock came on a Saturday afternoon in early November. New had been reading on his couch, a paperback biography that he had picked up from the free shelf at the library. The radiator was working for once, and the apartment was warm enough that he had taken off his hoodie and sat in just a t-shirt and jeans. His hair was tied back with a rubber band. His feet were bare. He opened the door and found Brandon Mercer. The young man looked different. Not dramatically different. Not movie, montage different where the lighting changes and the wardrobe is new and the soundtrack swells. Different in the small ways that actually mattered. His posture was straighter, but not rigid. His eyes met New's and held there instead of darting away. He had gained a little weight, the kind that comes from eating regularly. His hands were different. New noticed that immediately. They were marked with small cuts and calluses and stains that looked like wood varnish. Brandon held something in front of him. A bookshelf. Small, maybe 3 feet tall, with 4 shelves. The wood was birch, pale and clean. The joints were visible, hand-cut, not perfectly aligned, but solid. There were small imperfections, a slight gap where one shelf met the frame, a tool mark on the side that had not been fully sanded. But it was real. It was functional. It was made by hands that had learned to build instead of destroy. Brandon's voice was nervous but steady. For the girl, Lily. I heard she likes to read. New stared at the bookshelf. He stared at Brandon's hands. He stared at the wood and the joints and the imperfections and the tool marks. How did you know about Lily? Pastor James told me. Not details. Just that the man who gave me his card looked after a girl in his building who loved books. He said she needed a bookshelf. New leaned against the doorframe. His throat felt tight. You made this? The program at the church. Second step, they teach woodworking. Other stuff too. But I like the wood. Brandon turned the bookshelf slightly, showing the joints. It is not perfect. I am still learning. But it holds weight. I tested it. He said this last part with a pride that was quiet and tentative. The pride of someone who was not yet used to being proud of anything. New looked at this young man who 3 months ago had shoved his shoulder on a Brooklyn sidewalk and thrown a punch at his face. Who had cornered a frightened woman for entertainment. Who had sat on fire escape steps in a dirty alley and told a stranger about his father leaving and his mother disappearing and a juvenile system that had marked his skin like livestock. He looked at the bookshelf, at the hands that made it, at the cuts and calluses and varnish stains. Come in? New said, and opened the door wider. I was about to make dinner. Brandon hesitated. The old uncertainty flashed across his face. Then it passed, and he stepped inside. They carried the bookshelf downstairs together. Lily answered the door, took one look at the bookshelf, and declared it the best bookshelf she had ever seen, which was generous since it was also the only bookshelf she had ever owned. She immediately began arranging her library books on it, with the concentration of a museum curator organizing a collection. Margaret made extra plates. They sat at the small kitchen table, 4 of them, in an apartment that had been built for 2. The food was simple. The conversation was simple. Margaret asked Brandon about the woodworking program. Brandon told her about the different types of wood, about dovetail joints versus butt joints, about the old instructor at the church who had hands like sandpaper and a voice like gravel and called everyone son, regardless of age or gender. Lily asked Brandon if he could build her a desk next. Brandon looked at New, who raised an eyebrow, and said, "We will see." After dinner, Brandon stood in the hallway, his jacket on, ready to leave. He turned to New. I owe you something. You do not. Not money. Not that. I owe you an explanation. New waited. That night on the street, when I was doing what I was doing to that woman, I was not thinking about her. I was not thinking about anything. I was just empty and angry, and being around Cody and Travis made me feel like the emptiness was not my fault. Like if we all felt it together, it was not as real. He paused. When you stepped in and looked at me the way you did, with no anger, just this calm that I could not understand, something broke inside me. I have been trying to fix it ever since. A key. Ah. New leaned against the hallway wall. Are you? Am I what? Fixing it? Brandon thought about this. Really? About it? Not the quick automatic response, but the deep consideration of someone learning to be honest with himself. I think I am building it. I do not think there was anything there to fix. I think I am starting from scratch. Key. Anu nodded. That was the right answer. Not the comfortable one. The true one. What about Cody and Travis? Brandon looked down. Cody came to the church last month. He is doing the kitchen program. Cooking. Turns out he is good at it. A small smile. Travis is harder. He grew up in foster care. Never had anyone. I am trying to get him into the mentoring program, but he does not trust easy. Nobody who grew up like that does. I know. I am being patient. It is a new skill. Nu almost smiled. It is the hardest one. Brandon reached out his hand. Nu took it. The handshake lasted exactly the right amount of time. Firm, but not aggressive. Warm, but not sentimental. The handshake of two people who had started as enemies and become something they did not have a word for yet. Brandon opened the building's front door, then stopped. Without turning around, he said, I know you are not John. Nu went very still. Pastor James did not tell me. I figured it out on my own. There is an old movie poster in the back room of the church, in the storage closet. I was moving boxes and I saw it. Silence. I am not going to tell anyone. It is not my business. But I want you to know that it does not change anything for me. You could have been anyone that night on the street. What mattered is that you stopped. He walked out into the November evening and pulled the door closed behind him. Anu stood in the hallway for a long time. The building was quiet. Through Lily's door, he could hear the soft sound of her rearranging books on her new shelf, talking to herself about which ones belonged on which shelf, creating a system that made sense to her 12-year-old mind. He went upstairs. He sat on his couch in the warm apartment and looked at his hands. They were the same hands that had redirected Brandon's punch 3 months ago. The same hands that had installed light bulbs and fixed cabinet hinges. The same hands that had held Jennifer's hand in a hospital waiting room, while a doctor said words that unmade the world. He thought about what Brandon had said. You could have been anyone. What mattered is that you stopped. He thought about his mother. Not the real one. The one who lived in his memory. She had told him once, when he was very young, that the measure of a life was not the things you achieved, but the moments you chose to be present. When it would have been easier to be absent, he was present now. After 10 years of trying to disappear, he was here in a building where a 12-year-old girl arranged library books on a handmade shelf. In a neighborhood where a young man who had once tried to hit him was learning to build things with his hands. In a city that did not know his name and did not need to. A few weeks later, Caroline Bennett sent a letter to the church. Not to Key. Anu. She did not know he was connected to it. She sent it to Pastor James, whose address she had found through a community legal aid directory. The letter said that she had started therapy, that she was processing the attack and the older trauma it had reopened. That something about the way the stranger on the street had spoken to her, "You are safe now," had unlocked a door she had been afraid to open. The letter also said that she wanted to volunteer, that her legal training could be useful, that she wanted to offer pro bono legal assistance to young people in the Second Step program, helping them clear records, navigate the system, find paths that the system had never shown them. Pastor James read the letter to Key, knew over the phone. When he finished, there was a long silence. She does not know it was you, James said. Good. She wants to help the same young men who hurt her. Do you understand how rare that is? Anu closed his eyes. I understand exactly how rare it is. Forgiveness, James said quietly. It is not a reward for the person who hurt you. It is a gift you give yourself so the wound can finally close. New thought about Brandon on the fire escape steps, about the tattoo on his wrist, about the bookshelf with its imperfect joints, about Cody learning to cook and Travis still circling the edges of trust like a stray dog around a campfire. He thought about Caroline, who had been frozen on a sidewalk, unable to move, and was now choosing to walk toward the very thing that had frightened her. Not to confront it, but to transform it. James, he said. Yes, thank you for the card, for keeping it in your back pocket all those years for people like me. I did not keep it for people like you. I kept it for anyone. That is the point. New hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of his apartment. Below him, Lily was reading. Across the city, Brandon was sanding wood. Somewhere in a therapist's office, Caroline was learning that her body's decision to freeze was not failure, but survival. And in a church basement, a program called Second Step was giving people tools to build lives they had never been taught to imagine. None of this had been New's plan. He had not set out to save anyone. He had set out to buy light bulbs. But he had stopped. On a street where everyone else kept walking, he had stopped. And that single act, that 7-second intervention on a Brooklyn sidewalk, had rippled outward in directions he could never have predicted. Not because he was famous, not because he was strong, not because he had training or money or power, but because he was there, and being there meant something. On a cold Saturday evening in December, New sat at Margaret's kitchen table. Lily was doing homework on her bookshelf desk, which Brandon had indeed built for her during a weekend visit. Margaret was knitting. Brandon sat across from Anu, eating a plate of pasta that Cody had made at the church kitchen and sent over in a foil container with a note that said, "Tell Lily I said hi." Travis had come too, for the first time. He sat in the corner of the small living room, not eating, not talking, just being in the room. His thin frame was folded into the armchair, his oversized green army jacket still on despite the warmth, his restless eyes for once not scanning for exits. He watched the others the way a stray animal watches a family through a window, with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Margaret had noticed him the moment he walked in. She had said nothing about his silence, nothing about his refusal to eat, nothing about the way he flinched when she walked past his chair. She simply placed a glass of water on the small table beside him and said, "That is yours whenever you want it," and went back to her knitting. It took Travis 20 minutes to pick up the glass. When he did, his hand was steady, and he drank the entire thing without stopping. Margaret refilled it without being asked. No words exchanged, no transaction, just a glass of water and the understanding that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is accept something they did not earn. Anu watched this from across the room and felt something shift inside him that he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the loud, performative kind that came with declarations and promises. The quiet kind. The kind that grows in the cracks between broken things, the way grass grows through concrete, not because the conditions are right, but because life insists on continuing regardless of conditions. Travis would come back. Knew this with a certainty that surprised him. Not because the evening had been perfect or transformative, but because, for the first time in the young man's 20 years, someone had offered him a glass of water without asking for anything in return. And that kind of experience, once felt, becomes a standard. A minimum. A line below which you are no longer willing to live. New looked around the table. At the old woman knitting. At the girl doing homework under a light that worked. At the young man eating pasta with the careful gratitude of someone who remembered hunger. At the other young man in the corner, learning what safety felt like, None of them were his family. All of them were. He thought about Jennifer. He thought about Ava, the daughter who never drew a breath. He thought about the years of silence and invisibility and the slow, grinding belief that his purpose in the world had ended in a hospital room 18 years ago. He had been wrong. His purpose had not ended. It had been waiting for a Tuesday evening in Brooklyn when three young men surrounded a woman on the sidewalk, and an old man with a bag of light bulbs decided that silence was no longer something he could afford. Outside, the city moved, sirens and laughter and music and cold wind off the river. Inside, a radiator ticked, a pencil scratched paper, knitting needles clicked, and five people who had found each other through violence and grief and the stubborn refusal to look away sat together in a warm kitchen and said nothing at all, because sometimes the loudest thing in the world is the sound of people who are no longer alone. The light in Lily's room burned steady and warm. The bookshelf stood solid in the corner, holding its weight, and on the fire escape outside the kitchen window. If you looked closely in the fading light, you could see a small, battered card tucked into the railing where Brandon had placed it months ago, its edges softened by rain and wind, its words still legible. Grace Community Fellowship. All are welcome. Come as you are. Somewhere in that church basement, a workbench waited for morning. Sawdust still powdered the floor from the last session. A half-finished chair sat clamped in a vise, its legs not yet attached, its seat not yet sanded, its purpose not yet fulfilled. But it was becoming. Slowly, imperfectly, with patience and effort and hands that were learning. Just like the people who built it. Just like the man who had stopped on a street corner when nobody else would. Just like the woman who turned her worst night into someone else's second chance. Just like the boy on the fire escape steps who picked up a card he did not want and walked through a door he did not believe would open. We are all unfinished chairs, clamped in the vise of our circumstances, waiting for someone to do the next piece of work. Sometimes that someone is us. Sometimes it is a stranger who sits down in the dirt and says nothing at all. The end. No, not really. Because stories like this do not end. They ripple. They spread. They plant seeds in the hearts of people who hear them. Maybe you are listening right now and thinking about a time when you walked past. A time when you saw someone in need and told yourself it was not your problem. A time when you could have stopped but did not. That is okay. We have all been there. Every single one of us has made that choice. But here is the thing about choices. You get to make new ones. Every day. Every moment. Every time you see someone struggling on the side of the road, literal or metaphorical, you get to decide. Walk past or stop. New stopped. And it changed everything. Not just for Caroline. Not just for Brandon and Cody and Travis. For Lily. For Margaret. For himself. For an entire constellation of lives that intersected because one man decided that silence was not something he was willing to carry anymore. One choice. One moment. One person deciding that someone else's fear mattered more than their own comfort. That is not a superpower. That is not an extraordinary ability. That is just humanity. The kind we all have inside us, waiting to be used. So here is my question for you. Who is waiting on your street tonight? Who is standing frozen on a sidewalk, unable to move, hoping that someone, anyone, will stop? It might be a stranger. It might be a neighbor. It might be a young man sitting alone on fire escape steps with no one to talk to. It might be a 12-year-old girl doing homework under a light that is not bright enough. It might be an old woman who just needs someone to refill her glass of water without asking why. They are out there right now, waiting for someone to stop. Will it be you? Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you would like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter we are preparing for you.